David Gann here with another question from your Hayes & Harris Math SL textbook. This is Chapter 1D, Question 3. We're going to be looking at parts A, B, and C. In this question, we're given two functions, f and g, but we're given it in this funny format that I really hate. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite them. This says f varies with x according to this rule, but I can just rewrite that as f of x is the same rule. We'll do the same thing over here. G of x is a different rule. 3 take x. So 3 take x, 3 take x. X squared plus 1, x squared plus 1. Alright. Now we can start interpreting what this means. Fog of f of x. This is another funny way of writing a composite function, but this is the way that IB does it. I prefer to read this as f of g of x. And that's how I prefer to write it. This is equivalent to f of g of x. So f o g x is the same thing as f of g of x. Now remember, this x is a variable and it can represent anything. It could be a 3 or a 10 or a square root of 2, or it could even be another variable, like an a, or even another expression of variables, like a squared plus 7. Or it could even be another expression of x, such as 3 take x. And that's what we're saying here. We're saying that f of g of x is f of x, where x is represented by g of x. So I'm going to substitute x for g of x. So instead of this x squared, I'm going to have g of x squared. And then the plus 1 is still here. But I know what g of x is. It's 3 take x. So I could also write this as 3 take x squared plus 1. And now what I have is my composite function f of g of x. It just needs to be simplified. I'll FOIL this term out. So this is 3 take x times 3 take x plus 1. We'll have to do first, inner, outer, and last. First, inner, outer, and last. So 3 times 3 is 9. Negative x times 3 is negative 3x. 3 times negative x is negative 3x. And negative x times negative x is positive x squared. And then we still have the plus 1 at the end. So all of that became that. Just a little more simplification because I have some like terms. I'm also going to bring the x squared out front. Get them in the order of index. So highest index first, x squared. Then I have 2 negative 3x's for a total of negative 6x. And 9 plus 1 is 10. And this is f of g of x. For part B, they ask for just the reverse, g of f of x. So they want g of f of x. So we'll start with g of x, which is 3 take x. But we don't want x, we want f of x. Just like before, we replaced the x with an f of x. This is 3 take f of x. F of x is x plus 1. So that's x squared plus 1. And this just needs to be simplified as well. Remember to distribute the negative sign into the brackets. And when you do, that'll give you 3 take negative x squared take 1. We'll simplify this by putting in the order of the highest index first. That's negative x squared plus 2. 3 take 1. And that's part B. That's g of f of x. And we see that they're very different. F of g of x is very different from g of f of x. All right, the last part says to find the value of x if this is true. Find x if g of f of x is equal to f of x. Well, I know what g of f of x is now, and I know what f of x is. So I can try and equate the two and solve them for x. So let's start by setting up what they gave us in the question. They said that g of f of x is equal to f of x. I know what g of f of x is. It's that. G of f of x is negative x squared plus 2. And I know what f of x is. That was given in the very beginning of the question. F of x is x squared plus 1. And so now the question is, what is x if this is true? So we're just solving for x. I have like terms x squared, so I'll move x squared to the other side by adding x squared. So I have 2x squareds on this side for a total of 2x squared. I'll subtract the 1 to the other side. So 2 take 1 is 1. Now this is looking a little more simple. I only have one x in the equation. To try and get x by itself, I'll divide by 2. And then finally we'll take the square root. I'm just going to flip the equation around to say that x is the square root of 1/2. Anytime you take a square root, you need to remember that you need to consider the possibility that the answer could be positive or negative or both. And without any context here, there's no reason to throw away the negative part, so we're going to keep positive and negative. We're basically done here. There's just a small simplification remaining. We can distribute this negative sign because we just have multiplication and division underneath, no addition, no subtraction. So we can say the square root of 1/2 is the square root of 1 divided by the square root of 2. The square root of 1 is just 1. So this leaves us with plus or minus 1 over root 2, which is a term that you wind up with pretty frequently. If you're curious, that's plus or minus 0.707. You'll see that a lot more when we start talking about the unit circle.